I am here with Matt Kirtley. Wanted to have you on. You're one of the kind of brains in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, if you will, or at least I feel like you are. You've been doing a lot of the same stuff that I've been looking at recently. You've been doing it for quite a bit longer than I have. So wanted to have you on and kind of get your opinions about a few things. But before we do that, I guess kind of introduce yourself if somebody doesn't know who you are. I would be surprised, but just a little bit with that, and then also some of the websites that you do, DVDs, books, things like that.
Sure. So I'm a black belt under Eduardo de Lima, who is a old-time Gracie Baja guy down in Florida. And I've been training since, I guess, about 2004. So it's 12-ish years now. And what most people know me from is that I've posted online since I was probably a white belt, but people would have noticed as a blue belt because I was bold enough to start just taking photos of myself teaching techniques and putting them online, which now sounds pretty silly to have a blue belt doing that when there's, this time, so many resources for people who want to learn from the best people in the world. But it was a different world 10 years ago.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of funny. Even just a few years ago, that like one of the things that I talked about in there is, when we started, it was, hey, make sure that you don't go online, to get this information because all of it's going to be bad. But now you can, sit on your couch and, watch multiple time world champions explain, pretty much every little detail to you. And so it's kind of a huge change.
It certainly, and I know, like you've said, you in the past would have the opinion of don't go on YouTube,
Right.
because you're just going to see gimmicks or nonsense or someone without good qualifications who wants attention. And so I came up through that too. My instructor, would make fun of YouTube jiu-jitsu all the time because what it usually meant was one of your students, often a lower level student, who isn't even necessarily doing that well, following your instruction, you're standing there right in front of him, is coming in with something they saw on some grainy video and trying to make it work and failing or screwing around when you're like, man, listen, like, you're paying me to teach you something that I've dedicated my life to, and you're coming in here unfocused, and worse than unfocused, you're cluttering your brain up with this junk. So I do know where the YouTube jiu-jitsu insult comes from, but now with things like BJJ Scout or just any of the membership sites and many of just the free sites or YouTube videos, you can go find really good instruction. And then if you bring that to the gym, ideally, on open mat time or before or after class, so you're still focused during the class, you can get a lot out of that.
Right. Yeah, that's the crazy part to me is that, like I said, it seemed like, a long time ago that was the case, but now it's the big difference is I feel like that there's probably still some of that, but
there's probably, like, in volume, still just as much or more bad stuff. It's
right.
just you don't have to search so hard for the good stuff.
Right. Now as a coach, I feel like I'm somebody will come in with, hey, I saw, so and so, like, legitimate person do this, and can you explain this to me, or can you do this? And I don't necessarily mind doing that compared to I learned this from somebody that was in a backyard, and they were showing this on a tarp. So
yes, that has changed a lot. Just the other day, I was in Pittsburgh. I was talking to Marshall Carper, who I do jiu-jitsu instructionals with, and I taught one of his classes while I was in town, and I showed a Bravo choke, and he was reminding me how that was one of the first real popular things I ever did on my website, which was just try to really break down how the Bravo choke is done and the variations on it, because at the time, the best thing you could find, that I could find, teaching it was a black and white set of photos from, I think, Grappling Magazine of Shaolin doing it. And like I scanned that from the magazine and put it online. Or maybe one person did that before me and it was really grainy. And so I was like taking it to the next level because I had a good scanner. And it was me having a friend who would bring clippings from magazines in like binder, and we would look through them all, and I would go, oh man, look at this, I think that's a Bravo choke variation, and I would take the clipping and scan it. And so this sounds so kind of quaint, I guess, now, but you couldn't go on YouTube and find anyone teaching it. And
Right.
the move had different names because it would be regional. You know, one side of the country would call it the Shaolin choke, someone else would call it the Bravo choke, and then it started getting called the Darce choke. And you had to try to figure out, are they all talking about the same thing? Now it's just easy. You can go find a million things on it, but
Right.
it was special for 10 years ago to be able to go to one place and see it taught.
It's funny. I've actually had, I've been subscribing to grappling magazines since 2000. So I actually have like two big boxes, and so one thing I've started to do recently is actually go through a lot of the older ones, so 2002, 2003, and look in some of the techniques, and actually just either putting them up on Instagram from like some of the like stuff that I don't really see anymore, like the Velvet Guard stuff and things like that.
Velvet Guard, yeah.
So it's kind of crazy how things change so quickly. But anyways, we'll get into the first one. I read your articles last night that you had up on inverted guard. One about learn helplessness. Talk a little bit about that, if you would, and your opinion on that.
That's a good term for it. I actually never thought of it as learned helplessness, but the idea being that because somebody goes into even an individual match or just all their jiu-jitsu training with this perspective of I'm going to lose anyway, I'm never going to beat this person, they're already so much better than me, and they have all these ideas in their head that they use to self-defeat before they ever actually are defeated.
Right.
And yeah, the problem being like you don't want people to be unrealistic in their expectations about how well they're going to do, but you don't want them. But that's in both directions. You don't want them to just assume they're always going to lose. They're always going to be on the defensive. They're all because I've seen people improve by just changing their mindset about that, where they go, I'm gonna beat this guy. I'm just gonna do my best with this guy, and then suddenly they're so much more challenging to roll with because they aren't fighting as though they're already losing.
Right. You see that a lot when especially when white belts, blue belts come in. I've said this. I have higher belts now that still struggle with this to a certain degree when they're going against me. That I'll grapple with them, and I'll not necessarily let them get something, but they'll get something, good position or whatever, and you can immediately kind of hear their heart rate and breath rate
Mm-hmm.
go up 100%, and it's kind of crazy. But just and that like you had said before, and I said in there too, as long as that technique is solid, I mean, you're going to be able to beat really high level guys with that, or really in your own gym high level guys with that technique, as long as your technique is solid. It's something that, like you said, in the very beginning, I feel like people, like you said, they need to initially almost kind of have that as a reassurance of the fact that it's going to be a process and it's going to be tough, and they need to learn their defensive side of it. But at the same time, once they start training a little bit, really not relying on that learned helplessness anymore, and knowing that you can actually that you can beat higher level guys.
Yeah, and I think it often becomes a way for them to, I guess the term jiu-jitsu would be protect their ego, but to protect their feelings,
Right.
because then they can always just say, well, that guy's much better than me, of course I was going to lose, and just do that forever, instead of going, well, that guy's better than me, but what could I have done better anyway?
Right. They
And
just go ahead.
yeah, so just to have that perspective of finding, because if you go, oh, this guy's going to beat me, and he does, and you don't take anything from it, then you're just protecting your feelings, but you're not making yourself improve. I don't think you're protecting your feelings in a very good way. It's a very lazy way because it doesn't require you to do anything about it.
Yeah, you're not growing from it.
Yeah. And so I know the students who I most enjoy training with and who I feel progress the quickest are the ones who really don't care that I'm a black belt. They really just go at it. And I'm not saying that I want to train people who are just going nuts trying to kill me, but the ones who go and just try their techniques and they really go for them and they're not needlessly timid or afraid or really overly concerned with my counters because they'll be so you'll roll someone who's very, very, very defensive, and afterwards they start telling me all the things they thought they saw I was probably going to do to them, and that so they didn't try, so I wouldn't catch them in a trap. And I'm like, man, I did not think of any of that stuff.
Right.
But I didn't need to apparently because you respected it so much. I didn't even have to do it.
Yeah. And what's really weird is, the more, the longer I do this, the more I hear people say, okay, well, you're obviously thinking 3 or 4 moves ahead. And maybe that's completely different for, other black belts out there. But for me, it's, not necessarily muscle memory, but there's such a framework to things that it's, okay, like you were saying in the article too, this got broke down. And so, I'm trying to minimize your offense, and then also, just trying to put forth your own offense. And a lot of times, like I said, they think that they're me as a black belt, I'm 3 or 4 moves ahead, and that's almost never the case. Usually, it's I've got something in mind, and that's what I'm continuing to pursue.
Yes. So this last weekend I was in Pittsburgh shooting a new instructional, and that was one of the things I talked about, which was that you're not usually. I don't mean you said maybe you don't speak for other black belts. I have yet to find a black belt who does think more than a couple moves ahead. And
Right.
thinking's not even the right word. They've been in this situation so many times that they are prepared for what's going to happen next, so that the other person might feel as though, wow, they planned this all along because that choke went on so smoothly. And if you ask the black belt, they're probably going to go, I didn't walk into the room today and look at you and say, oh, I'm going to choke that guy after these 5 steps. I'm going to choke everybody in this room if I can. And I've done it so many times that there's going to be very few situations leading up to that where I'm so confused and have never seen someone act that way that I can't figure out how to get there to what I want.
Right.
There was a
Yeah.
really good Scientific American article on chess that came out years and years ago, but I've used that as an example too because jiu-jitsu always gets compared to chess, where people think chess grandmasters are just staring at that board at the starting state, and they're just reading your mind and they're predicting the future by a million moves. And when they actually study how people play chess at a high level, most, I don't know of any, but most don't do it that way. They have played so many games, they understand their strategy, they understand the game mechanics, they get a feel for how opponents play, and they just play the game. And at each moment, they understand what are their strengths and weaknesses in the situation, what do I anticipate him doing next, and not thinking too heavily about so far in the future. Because if you think 100 moves in the future and you're wrong on one, you've wasted everything past that point.
Right.
So you just need to reevaluate at each critical moment and understand where this could be going and what you will likely do next, how they will likely, and that becomes much more natural and not a very robotic, calculated thing. It just becomes more of an intuition.
Yeah. My best way of saying it is like, for the most part, usually when people come in, they've been starting jiu-jitsu. They're 24, 25. They've probably been driving for a certain number of years. When you're driving, there's all things that come up. You have to miss this pothole in the road. You have to do this. You have to change lanes. All sorts of things. And it's become instinctual because you've done it so much. And I mean, you're still making those calculations, but you're adapting to whatever kind of the road throws at you, and it's kind of dumb to think about, but at the same time, that's very similar to the way that I feel. Grappling is for me. I've done it so much that it's very much in that same way.
Yeah, I that's a great way to put it because it's real natural to most people who drive. But also you have to think back to what it was like when you first were trying to learn to drive.
Right.
Everything was hard at first for most, So I mean, at least for me, trying to figure out just how hard you press the gas pedal. Oh God, the car just jumped. And then you how hard you press the brake, and you like slam your head into the dash. And so then you get past that, and eventually, you're talking to people in your car and listening to the radio and blah, 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 all these other things, and you go, man, how did I get home tonight? I don't remember seeing a single thing on the road.
Yeah, that's one of the big ones for me is that sometimes a student will ask me, okay, well, what did you do here? What did you hear here? And luckily we film pretty much all of our practices, so I can go back and look because there's a lot of times that I have absolutely no clue what they were talking about as far as that. I don't know. I just don't feel like I have that big a frame of reference of my own, grappling at that time. It's just almost exclusively kind of a flow state, if you will. So.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the term for it. I know in Japanese martial arts that idea of no mind, like in Zen or like in karate, they talk about practicing till you achieve the state of no mind,
Yeah.
and they really hold it up as a ideal.
I'm not saying I'm doing that. I'm just
Well,
saying
what's funny is I have a
like a
friend
remedial
who,
version of that.
as a white belt, he's like, I don't know why they talk about this state being so special because I can't remember anything after I roll.
Right.
In that state, no matter what. I wish I could remember what I was doing.
Luckily, like I said, it's kind of nice to have cameras just because of that fact where I'm like, all right, I'm gonna go back, we're gonna look at this and analyze it. But all right, so the next thing that I wanted to talk about was kind of the same realm, just being okay with failing and learning. One thing that we've started instituting at our gym is we'll drill for a round, a technique, and then we'll flow for 5 minutes, and we'll do that for 2 or 3 rounds of saying, okay, you're gonna flow to the very end of a submission and then going from there. And for me, I feel like that takes a lot of the being okay with failing out of the situation. But I want to hear your opinion on some of the things that you've seen as far as people not wanting to fail and that kind of infringing on their learning process.
Sure. The problem ends up usually being that you have to either reframe what failing means because, like people always say, there's no failing in jiu-jitsu, either you win or you learn, whatever that cliche is. And that's true as long as you were actually learning. Because you could also just fail to learn.
Right.
And so, on the one hand, I think part of it will be the culture of the gym, especially the culture that the instructors and the higher belts are showing students that they're willing to train with each other, they're willing to try new things, to work on exposing their game so that people are taking advantage of the things that you're bad at, so that you have to improve those things. And so that will be more of a cultural thing. And if people are still resistant to that, in my experience, the easiest way is just to set up lots of, I've been just calling them games because that word tends to get across the idea better than calling it drills or isolation sparring or anything like that. Just to set up more games and to give them rules of those games that allow them to understand when they've failed the game, but it's so quick to reset and go again that they don't get to dwell on it. It's not like they get tapped out in that round and then they're like sitting there like slamming their fists on the ground, and then you got to remind them there's still 2 minutes left, and they're like, oh, fine. Whereas if you can make it a game and they understand they're both still trying to learn, and it gives the person who's being, I'd say more like, dummy's not the right word because they're being alive, but they understand that they should be making the other person have opportunities to do whatever the purpose of the game is, appropriate for their skill level, and then as the round goes along, if their skill is improving, appropriate in that moment. So that if we all come in and we learn a certain thing, and we start from that position. If you just learn that move, then your partner can very easily just stop you usually, because we all know exactly what everyone wants. We're all ready to just, okay, today we're doing butterfly guard sweeps from the knees. So then just everyone jumps to their feet. Right. And you're like, well, yeah, that's another problem we will deal with on the day when we're doing that, but it doesn't help your partner to learn today's lesson if you just jump out of the situation we're trying to learn. So for me, I really have loved the idea of isolation drills, of taking what you've been working on and then finding ways to turn them into games or live drills. I've heard people call them grills, game drills. So that you get to give people a little different framework so that they don't take the losing so hard, because they understand, oh, I was just in this game. And we reset so quickly, we did it again, and then we flipped top and bottom, and I did it again, and they don't have a chance to really get upset about it.
Yeah, you've won and lost so many different times that it doesn't really matter at that point anymore.
Yeah. And on the other level, it can just be telling your students, like if someone is getting really stressed out, upset, feel like, I haven't seen this in years, but I have seen people, they tap in sparring or they get swept and then they're, swearing, hitting the mat, and it's really insulting to their training partner, because you're acting like it's just unacceptable that they do jiu-jitsu.
Or that there's no way possible that they should have been able to beat them.
Yeah.
And
so those people, you just might have to grab and talk to them and tell them, that acting like that's, well, not right in public, but also if you're feeling like that, just talk about what you're doing. Why are you training? Why is it so important to you that you be untouchable every day of your life when you're just here training and you're probably like a blue belt? Right.
Last section I want to talk about real quick is dissecting skills into little subskills. If that's something that you do, or great. If not, your thoughts on it.
It's something I do on my own. I've been always trying to think of more ways I can give that to students, how they can build that mindset. I don't have a super smart answer for you, because it just seems to be something that the person has to come to. And it's just the real difference between, and people give things between the difference between wisdom and knowledge. Like, I can show you the knowledge I have, I can show you what I know, and ideally I can try to create a situation where you can gain the wisdom of it, like the wisdom being your personal expression of that knowledge. But some things just take time. I remember right before I got my purple belt, I was pretty well into my blue belt, I just felt like this real big shift in how I was training, and it was, to me, felt very profound. Of the moves were flowing together. I could be in the middle of one move and see how it was going to play into the next one, and momentum was working in my favor. And I was having a real hard time figuring out how to talk about this. And I told it to some brown belt. He goes, "Oh yeah, you're doing combinations now."
Right.
I was like, well, it doesn't sound as cool when you say it like that, because to me it feels
way
different. And so it's just all the things that we do as teachers to create, how we talk about it. We can just specifically try to call out a certain thing. If we're teaching a position and there's like a key concept to it, say about, if it's a sweep, how do you unbalance them in one direction and then change directions? Or how do you remove someone's post? And you can just try to specifically call that out while you're teaching. And then how you drill, and then the games. To get someone to really come to that realization on their own is going to happen a lot more in their mind than in yours.
Yeah, it's weird. I can't think of the theory that talks about that, but if somebody has come to their own conclusion, it sticks a lot better than if some, if I were to tell you the same, theory, it's different from,
Well,
you know,
it's like corporate politics, where the way you get something done is you convince your boss it was his idea.
right, exactly.
So you just have to create all of the opportunities for learning through how you teach, how you drill people, how they do games, how they do drills, how they spar, how you encourage them to think about jujitsu, how you encourage them to spend their time when they come in on, say, an open mat and they get to do whatever they want. And so I think one thing you can do is if you're talking about taking a skill and breaking it into sub-skills, or if you're taking, you know, an individual technique and you want to show people, listen, like this is one way we're expressing a movement or a concept, but
Hmm.
really it's any, you could improvise once you understand it's not just this technique. And I've had instructors who have been very good at, say, they teach a move and they say, well, listen, let's take this down to the simplest level we can. And they do things like, I had one instructor who was trying to teach me the idea of base and surface area and how you can make something difficult to turn over. And he had me just lay flat on my stomach like how wrestlers do when they don't want to get flipped over and
Yeah, like a
pinned.
parterre.
Yeah, so hands out, legs out, belly down, and your partner would try to pick you up by one of your feet and try to flip you like a pancake,
Right.
and you would be unflippable. And then he would have you, curl up, elbow on a turtle up real tight, and then the person would flip, roll you right over. And those two things aren't really that applicable for jiu-jitsu as real moves, but they are the biggest expression of certain concepts. If we're just talking about how can we make ourselves feel what it's like to be impossible to move, and how can we feel ourselves be easy to move.
Yeah, so almost over exaggerating the situation in order to make it stick.
Yeah, and that meant a lot to me. I really like those examples. I don't know if everyone does, but those things where you take a move and reduce it down to almost a ridiculous, sometimes silly level like that, but then you have nothing in the way confusing you, like the grips or the timing or whatever situation we were talking about. We just go, listen, we're just talking about levers. We're talking about center of gravity. And we're talking about how we can use a certain type of motion or a certain type of position to affect those things. Because if you can do that, you can take those away, and then if the person took the core concept, they might be in a new situation and recognize that, and then they have the ability to improvise. And it doesn't need to be something you taught them, because the tool they use in that moment could be whatever they need for it, but it's not going to have to be that you showed them every single possible way they could affect that person, affect the situation. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. Essentially, you've kind of the adage of showing them how to fish rather than giving them a fish kind of thing. So,
Exactly. The instructional I just filmed, the whole concept of it was concepts. It was just, I wrote down all of the things that I do where it's a principle I use or a certain type of motion that I see across many things. And so the big part of the instructional is just devoted to, my favorite concept was just this understanding of, if you know which way you can turn your face and you know which way they can turn their face, depending on the situation, you can predict almost every outcome, because you'll know, can they shrimp or can they bridge in a certain direction, or can I, if I'm the one who needs to do it.
right.
And if I don't want them to do something, or I do want them to do something, if I'm able to just say turn their head one way, I know now that's what gives you that illusion of thinking so many moves ahead. Is I set up a situation where I only have to think about two outcomes, because you can't shrimp and bridge if your face can't look somewhere. So I don't need to account for everything. I just need to account for the things that I've set up.
Yeah. kind of a solid point. Um, well, that's about all the time that I want to steal from you. So I feel bad that this ran probably way longer than I expected it to, but it was
Oh,
actually really good. So
no problem.
talk a few, or I should say, just a little bit about some of the things that you have out there, so people can go and this new series that you have out there, and the Back Crucifix book.
Sure. The big instructional I did is called Mastering the Crucifix. That's available through artichokemedia.com, and artichoke is spelled kind of funny, like arte suave, Arte choke. So this is something, I mean, I've been thinking about that crucifix instructional since I was probably like a purple belt, but no one wants to buy an instructional from a purple belt.
Right.
So as a black belt, I finally got to make it. And what makes it unique is that it's not just a DVD and it's not just a book. Really, it's like a website, but on each page of the instructional, you've got a video, so you're going to see me teaching it and talking about it. You've got it all written down, too, so that I can go into more depth on things I'm not so slick about saying. And you have every move shown from 3 angles on loop with little animations. So the goal with that was to hit up every kind of learning style we could, so that if you want to read about it and you want to see it immediately, so I go, oh man, I saw the move, I can't help but see it because it's sitting there right in front of me going boop, 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 over and over again.
Right.
And then you read about it, and then you watch me teach it, and then I can show it in motion and explain certain details. So that is my first big instructional, and it was Marshall's Carper, who I brought up before, his idea for this whole format. So I did all the website work and shot the instructional, and he came up with the idea, and he does all the smart planning and business stuff. That is on our website. The thing I just shot this last weekend, I went and saw Marshall, and we did a new one. I don't yet have a name for it, but it's going to be built around what are the key concepts that I like and that I feel are pretty universal. They a lot of points on biomechanics, understanding how the spine, the hips, the shoulders, the head move, and then giving specific examples, because I know it's been really popular to talk about concepts, but I can't just sit there and just tell you like formulas for physics, like, oh, force equals mass times acceleration. Like, well, how do I actually use that? And for me, it's always been someone takes a technique and has me do it, and then says, now let's really figure out why that works, not just because I said so, but is there a key concept there about leverage, balance, timing, strategy? And so it's just a big collection of those things, but what keeps it from being too crazy, and another hero moves I like kind of DVD, is that under each one, especially when they're grouped together, there should be a core principle I'm trying to show you through the techniques that are picked.
Very cool.
Other than that, asopian.com. That's been my blog forever, and that's where you'll find me just putting up my thoughts and videos and anything else I'm doing.
Yeah, and it looks like you did some other stuff on Invertigard.
Yeah, Inverted Gear.
Or Inverted Gear, sorry.
Yeah, Inverted Gear is the Upside Down Panda gi company. I've written for them recently, so I have 2 recent articles. One about playing to win or playing to lose, which you mentioned when we were talking about learned helplessness, and one about excuse making and how you can come out of places where you might normally make an excuse because you're frustrated and turn it into an opportunity to learn and think about it in a more positive way.
Very cool. Well, thank you for coming on. And like I said, I always like to get different opinions of folks that I consider, very intelligent and high-level jiu-jitsu guys on some of the concepts that I'm talking about, or some of the learning ideas that I'm talking about. So, again, thank you for coming on. And one last thing, I guess, if people wanted to train with you, where would they go?
I live in or around Allentown, Pennsylvania now, and I train and teach at a gym called Zombie Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu with another guy named Jeremy Henderson, who he and I both moved up to Pennsylvania coincidentally at the exact same time, and he opened a gym, and I've been training there since the first week, and I've been teaching there for the last couple of years. So if you're ever around Allentown It's just a little bit. I mean, a little bit, about an hour and a half from Philly. You can come train with you there. Just send me a message if you're in town and you want to make sure I show up too. But otherwise, I teach a couple nights a week, and I try to train as much as I can.
Very cool. Well, thank you very much for coming on, and said it was very insightful as far as your knowledge on learning and like I said, some of the same stuff that I've been trying to come up with, just a little bit more advanced, if you will. So,
You got ahead of me once you started doing the flipped classroom.
well, that like I said, that's weird though because I don't have anybody else that kind of does it that way. So, I'll be really interested to see how kind of the advancements that happen once other folks start, if they choose to start doing things like that. So, but, all right. Well, thank you
Great.
very much.
Yep.